Hi everybody, welcome to the latest CTO Craft Bytes. Today we are going to be looking at what it is to let go as a technology leader. If this is your first time at a CTO Craft Bytes event, let me tell you a little bit more about the group. CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders all around the world, focusing on supporting technologists in their leadership growth. Community members are just over 5,000 right now, and CTO Craft provides them with one-to-one coaching, mentoring groups, curated Slack community and events just like this one. Huge thanks today to the headline partners AWS and O'Reilly for helping make these Bytes events possible. I'm Emma, I'm Chief of Staff at 101 Ways, and I'm going to be your host today. Joining us today, we have Chris, Iwan, and Sara, and I'm going to let introduce themselves. Sara, why don't you kick us off?
Thanks, Emma. So I'm Sara. I'm the CTO and co-founder over here at restless.co.uk. Our mission is to help and inspire the over 50s to get more out of life. We are a Series A size startup, and I have a 14-year history as a technologist and leader. I've learned lots about what to do and what not to do about delegating, and I'm really looking forward to learning from the other panelists today.
Thank you. Iwan?
Nice one. Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for facilitating, by the way, Emma. My name is Iwan indeed, and I work at Moo. Moo does design and print and also has a lot of tech. And I'm an engineering director there, working with teams that take care of the customer-facing experience of Moo.com. So e-commerce bits and B2B self-serve platform, that sort of thing.
Great. And Chris?
Sorry, I got to learn how to work the controls better. My name is Chris Greeno. I have a software engineering background, worked for various companies, mostly in the startup, scale-up kind of range. My experience around delegation kind of comes from doing it very badly to start with, especially getting pushed into a managerial role and not really knowing what you're doing, to hopefully doing it much, much better over the course of my time. I work for various financial service companies. I just wrapped up a gig with a company called Cuvva, who does short-term insurance.
Cool. Oh, it's telling me I'm muted. You can hear me, can't you?
Yeah.
He's saying tap to unmute. I'm like, no, I don't think I do want to tap that. So something's bound to go wrong. Okay, great. So as usual, everyone in the audience can ask us questions anytime. If you look to your right, you see a little chat window. Feel free to send us any thoughts, let us know what you're thinking, see if anything's resonating. And then down the bottom, you will see a little bit that says ask a question. So in there is where I will pick up your questions and pose them to the group as we go. We are going to run through to about 1:30 today. And yeah, let's kick off with what we mean then. So aside from, yes, we all started singing the song from Frozen when we first read it of Let It Go, promising we're not going to sing that today. What do we mean then by delegating? We all talk about it, but what do we actually mean then as a technology leader for delegating? Let's kick off there. Who wants to start?
So I looked this up on
ruder than anybody else.
I looked this up on Google beforehand, which is what I usually do with these type of things because I'm being lazy. And it says to entrust a task or responsibility to another person, typically one who is less senior than oneself. So I think the thing that I mainly picked out from that when I was reading it is around the trust, and that's certainly something that I've found I've needed to identify when that's not happening, in terms of I'm not delegating something effectively, and perhaps it's down to trust. And so how do you go, in my mind, like how do you go about building that for yourself with your team members? I'd love to hear maybe what some of the others have done in that space.
Yeah, I would agree. Trust. In order to be good at delegating or setting up a good way to do that, trust is going to be key. And I think if I try and summarize, always think of two key pillars. First of all, I used to always say honesty, but I started talking about radical candor after the incredibly famous and awesome book, because honesty in a compassionate, caring way really is the first. Be a nice person. Just be a nice person. Be open and honest in what you do, and be direct and be clear as well. So that radical candor is the first pillar in to set you up for a trusting relationship. And second, I'd call out transparency. Like transparency about what work you're doing, what the status is, when even when things go right or wrong, that doesn't really matter. Be very transparent, but also be very transparent and clear about who does what, and what's anyone's responsibility in a certain task. So if you're very clear about that, then you've got a couple of components that get you on the way of building a trusting relationship around delegation.
For me,
Chris, anything to add?
Yeah, for me, delegation is about giving something away that's your responsibility, something that you're trusted to do, something that you're ultimately responsible for and held accountable. It's about giving something. So you're giving that person, and trust is a very important component. I think we talked a little bit about trust, and then a little bit about how to set up the framework for them to succeed, which I think are also very, very important elements, and well said. But when I think of delegation, I think of it, okay, I own this. This is my responsibility. If it goes wrong, it's on me, and I'm giving this to someone else, but I'm still held accountable. So this is on me. If they make a mistake, if they screw up, if they do really well at it, it's still on me. Although you have to give praise, obviously, and say, not take accountability for when other people do a great job, but it's still on you, right? So it's about making sure that they have the, I guess the framework, as Sara put it, even put it, to succeed. And it goes, for me, it goes a little bit, it goes into wider range when you're talking about trust, but how much can you trust an individual? How much do they know? How, because for me, there's a difference between trust and like their capability and ability to do it. I think in Ray Dow in his book Principles talks about like doing something 3 times successfully before being able to be efficient at it. High output management, I think Andy Groves talks about task relevant maturity, which I think are roughly the same concepts, where if someone has given the ability to do something, then they have a higher level of trust. A proven ability to do something, then they have a higher level of trust comparatively to someone that is brand new. It's like throwing a junior engineer and saying, hey, can you go integrate with this company? I'll see you in a couple months. That would be, obviously no one would do that. So that would have lower level of task relevant maturity, lower level of capability. So you have to employ more frameworks around them to check in.
Do you think there's anything specific about delegating as a technology leader rather than just a leader in general? I mean, I guess there are plenty of CTOs even that still like to stay very technical. Is there anything specific around the types of things you might be delegating or the people that you're delegating to as the technology leader?
I wouldn't say in terms of leadership, because delegation comes down to leadership. I wouldn't say in terms of leadership there's anything technology specific. And I've found personally it can be hampering in a way if you know too much about what somebody's working on in the technology space. I find it's easier to delegate when you're like, I don't actually know that space very well. I've built some trusting relationships with that person. They've got a proven track record, to Chris's point. They've incrementally built up a proven track record, and so I can trust them to do it. When I know something quite well and inside out, that's when I find it more difficult, when I'm like, how are you implementing this API, and how are you thinking about monitoring and logging around it? Like, if I know something, I'm going to dive a lot deeper, when really actually you should be much higher, and you should trust people and empower them to deliver on your accountable actions. So I actually find it more difficult that I'm technology focused on that.
Right. So you may have delegated it in name, but you haven't actually let go of it. Because
yeah, and I need to catch myself. I'm like, just because somebody didn't do it exactly the way you thought it should be done, that doesn't matter. That's not giving them that empowerment side and that authority to make their own decisions.
I would back up Sara there. Sorry, I'd back up Sara there. When I first moved into a management role, someone says, hey, do you want to manage these people? And you're like, sure. That's basically the training done. Then when I knew the subject and I knew the material very deeply, I really micromanaged people. And my first review, I basically got across the board, well, excuse my French, asshole, for 14 or 15 years ago when I first got the role. So I was like, what can I do here to change? Because if I know the content too well, I just get too heavily involved. So I came up with a framework for myself that I'm like, if I didn't know how to code, how would I manage these people? If I couldn't check SVN or GitHub requests, what would I do? How would I make sure that what they're producing is good? And it doesn't really matter if it is done the way I want it to be done myself. It just needs to get done and meet some goals. What are those goals? So I set up a way to do that myself with just metrics, and it gets you about 70% there. And you can set up metrics for like common ones are like response time and those kind of things. Those are normal metrics for in engineering: response time, load time, anything around there. But then you also set up metrics around like, did we meet the customer needs? Did that thing you're building actually deliver some value? And then that gets you the kind of the rest of the way there. And the rest is just like coaching and mentoring. That when I started doing that, I was able to back off and be like, okay, now I'm letting them own the task, not just telling them how to do it.
Yeah, I would extend on that indeed. Go back to your question, Emma. I think when you're delegating, the most important things on the way to empowering your people is to make very clear what the goal is first of all, and that requires you to translate what the business needs from your area into something that makes sense for the teams and people in your area. So that part doesn't necessarily require technical skills. Then a second item on the road to truly empowering is make it very clear what boundaries are as well. And boundaries can be maybe what is your budget, how many people are you able to hire into your teams, what is your domain, etc. Not necessarily something you need to be highly technical for, but you might be delegating, of course, depending on the level that you work to engineers, and then directly, and because you don't need to be a manager to be a leader, obviously. And then your technical knowledge is going to help you ask the right questions. So depending what type of relationship you have when you delegate a task, you might either be coaching, mentoring, only be informed of the thing you delegated. So the technical knowledge certainly will help you to ask the right questions. I have, however, worked with engineering managers that had never been individual contributors, and they were awesome. They were some of the best. She was one of the best I worked with. So.
Interesting. And that leads into when we're talking about, like you say, if you're managing engineering managers or working with those managers, it's different between delegating work out to engineering teams and learning to let go or whoever it may be, but then also managing managers and that difference in the kind of leadership style that it takes and what you're delegating and how you check in on them and how you empower them. So yeah, what kind of experience or challenges do you think that throws up that's different?
Yeah, that's a good one. I can kick off on that if you want. Sure. Managing managers is indeed a different ball game. Where if you manage individual contributors, sure, you have this megaphone for that group of people, but when you manage managers, it's quite likely you manage a larger domain or a larger group of people. So suddenly your scope of influence is a lot higher. So you will need to get your head around more of that, translating what the business needs for a larger group of people. But in the context of delegating, you also need to approach it in a different way, because you're not with the individual contributors day to day anymore, probably in your context. So you can check in on a regular basis. You can go to every stand-up. You're not in every retro or whatever ways of working that you have. You won't be there day to day. So you need to find other mechanisms to check in regularly with a large group of people that keep that into account. So that is challenging to find that, how to learn how to manage that skill and how to reflect that on how you delegate.
I think it's still outcome driven though, right? It's just at a higher level and slightly more ambiguous. So helping them find a framework around that more ambiguous outcome, like I need you to deliver an app by H1, right? That's much bigger kind of, right? And then coaching them, to Chris's point as well, coaching and teaching, here's how you delegate. So you know how to delegate, so you've gone through that path. What are picking out the things that maybe you didn't actually learn that from somebody, maybe you just intuitively knew how to do that. So really breaking down, how did you learn to do that and what did you do, and passing that on to somebody and coaching and teaching them through that.
Right, so now you're not just delegating, you're teaching other people how to delegate as well.
Yeah, which is hard, right? That can be.
I think the other panelists have made some great points. I think I'll just to reiterate something they said, like coaching is probably more key at that level. because you're not talking to a bunch of people. You're talking to one person, and then they have to spread the word in their own way. So instead of just reiterating their points, maybe I'll talk about some of the mistakes that people normally make. I've seen people make. One of which is when you're managing managers or managing managers, whatever you want to call it, when you go 2 levels or 3 levels, you start getting used to, as in from my point of view, you hire a manager and you just let them get on with it. What you tend to do initially is level jump when something's going wrong. So all of a sudden something will go haywire. Instead of trying to figure it out with the manager, you jump automatically into the deep end like you had been before and start working on it with the engineers and undermine the individual that's managing them. That's happened, and I've seen it happen with others, and I've done it when I first started managing managers. So you have to be very, very careful of that. You can't, by doing that, you're completely undermining the person you have put in place, and then their people aren't even going to them anymore. They're starting to go to you instead. So you have to be really, really crystal careful with that, because it'll take 3-6 months to repair the relationship if you don't do it very, very well. At least depends on the person, et cetera, but it does take a while to repair the relationship if you undermine. And you can lose people from doing that as well. Some of the other mistakes that are made are just not being, I guess, context specific enough, speaking to them, to Sarah's point, speaking to them at the wrong level, like asking them to do an individual task instead of a larger stake goal. And speaking to them as if they're developer, like we need to develop web service X and web service Y and A, B, C, D, E. And you're like, no, I'll figure that out. What do we need to deliver to the customer or the client or whatever? That I've seen done a few times, especially when you're delegating. And new managers will do the same thing you did when you became a manager. The mistakes you did is the same mistakes most people make. They're pretty common. You go through them, unless people are just naturally inclined. And I find the people that are naturally inclined in a certain, like, say, delegating or say mentoring or say coaching, they're most likely not to be able to coach that person on that specific skill, because it comes to them naturally. So they don't even see what the hell is going wrong.
Don't know how you do it. You just do it.
Yeah. Why are you not doing this? So that's when you kind of need to bring in outside coaching for an individual, which I think can be helpful as well.
There are a couple of questions coming through from the audience, and just to say, I think there's a lot going on in the chat as well. If there are any of those questions that you're pinging around to one another that you would like to pop to the speakers, do pop them in the ask the question bit down the bottom. That would be really helpful to me. So a couple that have come through, just picking up on where you were then around mistakes that have been made and how you do it and who you're delegating to. If I start with this one, is it Olgas has asked, how do you handle a situation when the person that you have delegated to has failed to deliver? So if you've delegated it and it hasn't happened, what do you do then? Any advice?
Yeah.
Go on.
Go ahead, Sara. You first.
Sure?
Yeah, go ahead.
My approach to that tends to be, I think you really need to acknowledge that. I don't think you need to chastise somebody for it. It depends, obviously, how many times this has happened. Like, there's a potential performance issue that we need to monitor that. But acknowledge it, don't labour it, and then really break down into what actually were the problems with them and help them identify it as to why they were failing to deliver, because you might not be aware. Maybe they're not telling you, I was under-resourced over here, and so we needed some help to do that, or I had a missing skill set and this took a lot longer to deliver. So I think really diving down into why there was a problem, but that really does require open communication. To Iwan's point, you need that psychological safety for people to come to you and feel comfortable about talking about their failures. So there's a lot of pre-work to go in order to be able to do that.
Right. Yeah. It'd be easy, I guess, for people to start to feel attacked if you suddenly go into, well, why hasn't it worked and why have we done this? Yeah. Okay.
I'd like to extend on that, because that's a good point. I was going to say something similar. So first of all, a sort of instinct or habit I developed is to, first of all, self-reflect. Because how come the person or team or that you delegated to is at the point of failure, and you get to a point where you identify it as a failure, something has gone wrong along the way there, and you're delegating. So I think mistakes I have made a lot is not to get my framework for accountability right. So, for example, a mistake I recently made was I checked in with one of my people after 3 months after delegating a task, which is an insanely long amount of time. So I assumed out of semi-informal chats that we were very aligned, but you know how it goes with assumptions. So then at the end of those 3 months, when we reflected on what's the outcome, because it is always about outcomes, indeed, Sarah, we looked at the outcome and we were misaligned around what that outcome needed to be. That was not the fault of the person I delegated to. I hadn't in a correct way kept the person accountable for the right for making progress towards the right outcome. So so that's a healthy reflex because delegation. I think I was thinking before this chat, what does mastery look like in delegation? And I think it's one of those things. Mastery just looks like you're making less mistakes than when you didn't have any experience. So as long as you in that relationship, you both take learnings away from that mistake, you're fine, and then just focus on moving on.
For myself, I usually do exactly the same thing. Is like there's some self-reflection, like how did we get to the point of failure? If we got to the point of failure, obviously a bunch of stuff went wrong before that. The first thing I do when I talk to the person is I don't blame, though. I usually start with, this is my fault. Something went wrong, but I'm ultimately accountable for this, so let's move on. This is on me. No one's going to think it's on you, so let's just talk openly. And then we speak openly and try and figure it out. It's just about talking and getting it out there and figuring out what went wrong. Again, if it continues, there's a problem. But usually if it's got to the point of failure, then there's something else going on there. And the accountability framework that Iwan was talking about is very important to have in place when you're discussing things. I think it's high levels of context and high levels of freedom is the way I like to look at it. So you give as much context as you're humanly possible about what the goal is, where you're trying to get to, what you're trying to achieve, how you're doing, and then you give them as much freedom as you possibly can based on how well they've executed in the past.
That leads really nicely onto a question that was asked earlier, but flows very nicely from where we are now. Around you talked before about goals and boundaries, which is kind of that framework around how you set something up. And where we're talking about where maybe that has broken down, Joel asked the question earlier, any advice and tips around how to be really clear in those goals and boundaries? So when you're setting that up, any advice for people?
I think I've done it a couple, sorry, is anybody else want to go first? I've done it a couple different ways. I like Amazon's input and output metrics technique. I like OKRs in conjunction with the two. They talk about a high-level task and a low-level, because once you have a metric or a number or something that they have to achieve, it's really hard to not understand what you're trying to achieve. Do you know what I mean? Like the ultimate outcome is more customer volume, less turnover, less higher CAC. I don't know, lower CAC. Why would be bad? Higher CAC. Whatever you're trying to achieve, it's very easy to put that into numbers. And you say, these are the input metrics we're going to play with, and these are the output metrics I expect to be affected. And maybe there's a chain of metrics in there. But I like the idea of when you show what the input metrics is and what the output metric you believe is going to be affected, you're basically saying, I believe this number is associated with this number. Basically, like, I believe if I can change the flow of the website by X less fields, then drop-off will be less. And this is a pretty contrived example because I don't have any actual examples, but I believe this is going to be less. But then it's showing the managers what your frame of thinking is, so they can test the actual thinking of the idea rather than just, what are you doing, how are you doing? I found with OKRs, a lot of time you're like, yeah, it's going well. Yeah, it's going well. You get to the end of the quarter or the end of the cycle, and you're like, yeah, we didn't do it. Like, great. What happened between this week and last week when it was going well, and now you didn't get it? Or like, well, I thought it was going to pay off. OKRs are different like that, but because you need to test people's thinking and you need to test people's passion, I guess. When someone has an idea that's very much against what I think people should do, I usually test for passion. If they're really, really passionate about it, they're more likely to succeed than it's just a fleeting idea. Anyway, I'll shut up for a second on that other panel.
And another technique I started using is for say you have 24 of work streams or initiatives going on. I've asked my team and people that I delegate to align around what I call one sliders. For each initiative that we work on, we put in place one slider that with the same question. What is the goal? What is the outcome? where are we at currently and what is the next step. And so then once a way, as most of my team, as many of you I'm sure, are working from home, once a week we set ourselves a reminder to review, to update these one sliders, just one simple slide focusing on each initiative. And that allows us then to, in an async way, to ask questions on the slide. Oh, should this be the next step? And like, oh, is this enough progress? Or even compliment, like, great progress, keep it up. You ever don't have to. There's a couple of benefits. First of all, I noticed that if you have this simple one slider that basically holds the translation, how does your tech team going to contribute to the company-wide goals? That's what it explains as well. So I thought I would be using it to do better delegation, but the added advantage is I now started tagging in people from across the business just to and ask them questions such as, this is how we're going to contribute to this goal. I think this is what we talk about. Could you confirm? And now they start asking questions on the same one sliders. So this simple technique, just a couple of slides that takes us about 10 minutes to update every week, allows us to align really efficiently. Allows me to build to re-establish my trust that we're all on the same page, me as well as the people that I've delegated some of the work through. So a very simple technique, very effective, and leads to transparency, which we mentioned before.
Sara?
I actually don't have anything to add to those amazing points. I was like, I love that one slide. I'm making notes furiously here. I'm like, I'll definitely be doing that with my team.
I expect to see those soon then. I'm interested, I guess, from all of you as well, is how you learned to delegate then. Are you one of those that's just done it naturally? So don't really know how you've done it? Did somebody teach you? Did you know you were learning it at the time you were learning it? Or is it just something you pick up on the job then? How did you learn to be a delegator?
I think I was off the back of this panel, I was actually thinking about this question, how did I learn? And I think it started with a reflection, to Iwan's point, like identifying, like, am I delegating effectively? What are the indicators for that? It's like working long hours. I'm focused on granular tasks. I'm not thinking about the bigger picture. I'm working, too much, and I'm maybe failing to deliver on certain milestones. I think for me, it was like, how do I fix those problems? And then you learn how to delegate. So identifying what are the indicators for failure to delegate, and then saying, why am I not delegating? Things like, do I not trust my people? Do I not have the right people? So it doesn't always have to be your team that you delegate to, right? It can be external providers, support, 8x5 support team, or whatever it is. Or is it because I'm scared to step out of my comfort zone? Like, that genuinely could be a reason that you're not delegating. And then once you've done that, how do you action those items? How do you go and build that trust with your team? Do I go and recruit in? How do I get comfortable with learning new things? Do I need to coach my team a little bit more? And I think that's how I started to learn to delegate, was just taking those kind of 3 steps, and identifying that there's a problem first is often the case.
Right.
Yeah, I was sort of organically learning, and I was my approach to delegating was simply what I had seen before with other managers. In fact, I've also had bad managers, so I also learned a few things on what not to do, and that went very, very deep into the micromanaging type way of, well, that's not even delegating. But one of the things I noticed is, because of the person who I am, and we're obviously all unique in our own beautiful self, what worked really well for me when people delegated to me was to be given a lot of freedom to figure things out for myself. So I have had the luck of having had managers myself that would recognize that quickly and take that approach. So when I mirrored that approach on people that I delegated things to, that works for a lot of people, that actually doesn't work for everyone that way. Because to Chris's earlier point, like, you also need to have the capability to execute on the capabilities to have to execute on a certain task. And my happy place would have naturally been to learn that capability by myself and find my own way, but that's not everyone's best way of learning. Like, mentorship and coaching is very important. So as I was mirroring what my good managers had done with me, I quickly realized, oh, I need to read up here on other approaches, because what works for me is not necessarily going to work for everyone that I delegate to. so that's that was an early learning, luckily, but that's a work in progress.
I spoke about it a bit earlier, but it's something definitely that didn't come naturally to me. I didn't even know I was being a jerk until I was told. What happened was I was managing about 15 people. It was fine, and then it grew to 30, and I didn't know how to handle it. And instead, I just worked a lot of hours and tell lots of people what to do, except for the 15 people I had a lot of trust in. But I didn't even know I trusted them at the time. I didn't really understand. I honestly just didn't understand. So what happened was we got bought by a big company. They brought in an HR term and made us do a 360. And I was reading it and I was like, well, everyone thinks I'm basically an ass. So this is not the greatest place to be. What do I do here? So I just decided if I was going to do a management, it was a different job than being an engineer. And if I wanted to do it well, I needed to stop reading engineering books and start reading management books and join management groups and join talks on management like this. And I've been doing that ever since, and hopefully getting a lot better at it. At least the reviews say it's better at it. But I think there's a couple of key points. One that Sarah mentioned is like, if you're overworked and you can't find like 2 to 3 hours free in the day, then you're probably not delegating enough. Like it's one of those telltale signs that you're just being overworked. If you can't find 3 hours a day, then you need to start to delegate things because you need to have the free time. You should actually try to delegate as much as you can to the point where you try and delegate everything, in my mind. I at least try and get to there, and I'm like, I really want to be just lazy. Let's pretend I just want to be as lazy as possible and do nothing during the day. I don't think anybody actually would do that because you always find something else to do, and there's always something more. And they're like, oh, we got to go through a big hiring plan. Oh, there's a framework I've been meaning to set up about the hiring for ages. Let me do that. Or, oh, the job ladder needs some rework because it worked for 30 people but not 60 people. So I really need to do that. So there's always something you find to do, and they're always additive. And there's always something that you can do that no one else has experience on. But if you can delegate I've heard the term delegate till it hurts, and I quite like it. And if you can try and be as lazy as possible, it sounds horrible, I know, but if you can try to do that, then you actually get to a place where the whole team structure is operating better. Because there's always little niggly problems that are going on and you're just not absorbing. Like if the hiring process could always be improved. The job ladder could always be improved. And there's little people that are like, oh, I'm a little upset about that. I'm a little upset. I'm not leaving, but they're a little upset. And as the team grows to 30, 40, 60, 80, then the upsetness becomes, gossiping and bureaucracy and other things. So you really have to take the time and really understand that those things will become bigger problems unless you delegate really, really a lot until it's really painful.
But perhaps.
Go on.
Sorry, Emma. I was just going to extend on that. Perhaps a good question to ask yourself is, like for example, recently I started working 4 days a week instead of 5. But actually, I started working with one more teams instead of decreasing my scope of responsibility. So I had to get better at delegating at that point. But now that I managed to do that, I ask myself, why didn't I work in that way when I work 5 days a week? So of course, the next question is going to be, imagine, and I'm not going to start working 3 days a week because I don't want to, but imagine I work 3 days a week. What will I change about my ways of working and ways of delegating? So that's going to be my next challenge, to sort of break down delegating everything into iterative small challenges for myself. Imagine I could free myself up for a whole day, could work more on strategy or strategy work for the business or something like that. So that's a good challenging question.
Something I've been doing around that, sorry, I just provoked a thought. Recently, I've been using like a time tracker, and I enter all these tasks and I tag them I bucket them essentially into task types. So I'll be like admin, recruitment, whatever. And then I'm starting to reflect when we go through, well, is that essential? Do I need to be involved? And what it's starting to drive is like, oh, actually, I might need to get somebody in the admin space to help me because I'm spending 50% of my time there. Oh, actually, I'm spending 30% of my time in recruitment. Maybe I need to hire that. And it might not be a technical problem that you need to solve for. You might be spending your time on things, small things, but that are amounting as a collective to much, much more. So I've yet to have that. I've got a couple more weeks to go to see all the data points, but it's been really interesting learning to figure out where I'm actually spending my time and what I need to delegate into.
That's where I was headed, really, and what I'm thinking, it sounds like a lot of the things that you're actually delegating or clearing off your decks are quite operational and quite doey, and there's something that has to be done. Who can I delegate this to? Which then what frees your head up to be more strategic, I think you'd said, Ivan, or the thinking around, like you said, Chris, around, is it hiring processes? Is it the thinking time, that headspace that you lose when you are so on the job and operational and in the weeds? Is there then a theme of stuff that you do delegate and you don't? Because you could go and ask someone to go and do that thinking for you, or to go do that strategy for you. Are those the bits that you don't want to delegate? That's really you? Where do you identify what's a good candidate to delegate then?
I can take a shot at that if it's okay. I delegate. I start with I start with communication. So, is everyone have the right context and communication? So I've set up a very similar meeting structure since I've been coming to every business, and it's weekly staff meeting, but it's slightly different. There's no agenda, and then monthly kind of strategic meeting that is anything that gets bumped up from the staff meeting that doesn't get taking place with the huge agenda, pre-work, everything. So there's usually 1 or 2 items max on the list, but we go really in depth with them and try and solve them. So I start with those, and those take up 2 to 3 hours. Actually 4 hours a month for the staff meeting usually, and then about 4 hours a month, maybe less, maybe more for the other 2 meetings. And I say, okay, let me get them running really well, and then start to delegate them. And once those communication structures are in place, I'm confident, and then I can go and ask people, like, what did we learn? What's the news on the ground? And I still have skip level one-to-ones, and they're saying the same things being repeated in terms of priorities in the boardroom. I'm like, okay, it's going well. And I can step back from that. I no longer have to chair those meetings. I no longer have to be involved with them. I can move away. And meetings tend to take the bulk of your time when you're in leadership roles. At least that's what I found. Maybe you guys have found something completely different. You have an amazing company, but most of the time you just get sucked into meetings, and it's like endless cycle of meetings. So it's really just about deciding, do you need to be there? Do you need to be part of it? And can you delegate the meetings you're actually chairing? And the meetings that you are not the best to be responsible for, you have to let your ego go and be like, I don't need to be in there to make the decision. John can. John's underneath me and he's talking to the CFO, but it's like you need to let your ego go, and you don't need to be the one making the decision. John's or Sara or Bob, whoever, it doesn't really matter. Sorry, Sara was the first name that came to mind.
Wonder why?
Yeah, really big thinker I am. So whoever is in there can then make the decision, and you kind of have to just literally let go and then trust them and back them up. And if you're willing to trust them and back them up, even if you think it's not the best decision, you have to trust them. You have to let them go with it. If John, who's talking to the CFO, makes a decision about how they want to move forward with the financial system, and you're like, whoa, that's a horrible idea. That's just going to undermine John. It's going to wreck the relationship. You're not going to be in there. So you have to let them go and see where they go with it, and put in some steering points. I like to call them 15-degree nudges. So you kind of nudge them 15 degrees a couple times, and then they're back on track to where they need to be. And there's no face loss, and there's no ego gone.
Okay.
Yeah, in terms of what to not to delegate, Emma, I think first of all we touched on capabilities. People you're delegating to have certain levels of capabilities, and they might not have certain skills or knowledge yet to perform certain tasks. So obviously you're going to actively try and identify which task can I actually not yet delegate, and then come up with a plan in able to get to that point. And then next, there's I'd like to look at it as if like people on their whatever level that you work on, ideally you are very much in sync with people on the same level in different functions of your business. So people I delegate to, I will try and set them up for success to make sure that they can have a successful relationship with their stakeholders or other people in other parts of the business. So equally, I built up relationships with people, with my peers across the whole of the business, and have a variety of work to do with them, and that is work that I wouldn't delegate. That's my job, and that's often to do with strategy, or indeed creating that environment for both mine but also my peers' teams to be successful. So that work, that's my job. I wouldn't delegate that unless someone is about to take my job, and I would teach them how to do it.
I agree with all of those points. Kind of, yeah, the strategy point, seeing what's next, what's coming around the corner, what potential threats are there to the business, how can we grow as a business, how can tech support that, and thinking about those bigger picture things, whilst your delegates are kind of helping to move things along. To Run's point, you're almost filling in those gaps as well. So we had a gap internally around data protection, so I need to go in, I need to fill that gap, I need to figure out how we're going to wrap around and sort it out. I don't want to have to get my delegates or my team to go and figure that out, and because you've only got a finite amount of resources, so you can't just, although I'm saying, fill the gaps with external, there gets a point where it's like, I actually either can't hire, everyone knows the hiring market is an absolute pain right now, or I can't find the right external contractor, so I'm going to have to go and figure out how to fill that gap. That's kind of a little bit of your role in my mind.
So it's freeing them up as well. So
letting them to get on to do what they're good at, right, and giving them the support to do that, and then helping them fix the particularly complex or difficult situations that might arise.
Yeah, there is a question from your.
Sorry, I'm more on Sarah's side there. Like not that I'm against Iwan. Sorry, I usually don't delegate the things that I think are going to overstretch people, and I try and like whoever's good at whatever, I try and line them up with that and make them whatever makes them happiest and they're good at. Then I try and fill the gap. So if there's a gap on, I don't know, security, I may not know a lot, but I'll find an external consultant to come in and check our security or whatever, or there's a gap on GDPR. I don't know. I'm just making this stuff up, but I'll try to fill the gaps that are the ones that either A, people that want to fill, or B, are just not in their wheelhouse and they can't do it as well. So I'll try and be like, okay, well, that someone needs to take responsibility for that, and we can't hire or we don't have enough people, so I'll do it. And it also, I think it shows good. It builds a lot of trust with the team. Because if they see you in the trenches a bit doing like the stuff that no one wants to do, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, he's good. He's got her back. He's not just like hanging out having coffees and stuff.
Yeah, there is a question from the audience, which I think is really relevant to what we're talking about now as well. So it says, do you consider delegation primarily as a tool for either scaling your throughput, so delivering more output, getting stuff done more, or coaching others and developing others, so growing the capacity of others to deliver? So is it about getting more stuff done, or is it about growing other people?
It's both, I would say, because if you don't do one or the other, you're kind of in a tough spot, really. If you're not increasing throughput, then you're not delivering more value to the business. But if you're not growing the team, you're not keeping them happy and retaining them and growing them. Like, I think, sorry to sit on the fence with that one.
For me, look at it like, if I were to walk away tomorrow, what would be the major impact? Have I built a sustainable team here? Have I built a high functioning team? And if I can walk away tomorrow and you're just missing strategic, and it's not just strategic, but there's going to be no effect for 6 months, 3 months, 8 months, 9 months, because unless there's another major player that comes into the business and kind of wipes, or COVID comes again, then nothing's really going to change the day-to-day business. So to me, it's about growing the team and the functions together. So I guess it is about growing people, but you're not specifically doing it to grow people. Although you do that sometimes with the growth plans and things like that. But you're doing it, the reason why you're delegating is actually to grow, so the business grows up, basically, is how I look at it. So the people can make decisions on their own. They don't need sign-offs or check boxes or what I call bureaucracy as much as I can. They need to just get on with things the way they know how, and they have the autonomy and freedom to do it. but in order to have the autonomy and freedom, they have to have experience and they have to have done it a few times. And you just throw a task at someone that's not going to do it. So you have to, it's about the coaching, but it's mostly about the business growth. Like if you ever want to grow as a business and a company, then you have to give people freedom, or else you just have to be everywhere, which is not physically possible. And you're going to make mistakes too. Like you're not perfect.
I agree with that. It depends what we mean by throughput. It's not really about bandwidth, more about flow. There needs to be a flow of work. So you don't necessarily try and continuously expand your bandwidth, because that depends very much on again on the people's capabilities. And actually, it might be okay if a certain a person that you work with might be in a stage of their career where right now I'm not going to learn more capabilities, because that's not the place I'm in. So then I'm not going to attempt in that area to increase bandwidth without other changes. Because that's those are the people, that's the person I have in place right now. So I think it's about a good steady pace and flow, rather than without thinking about it consciously, making the bandwidth bigger.
Okay. One of the other aspects of, as far as letting stuff go, and I think you touched on it before about where you're delegating stuff, but also supporting people so they keep their decks free as well, not just yours, but theirs, and making sure they've got enough. And part of that with me is, I think we touched on it before, of kind of demonstrating or modeling good behaviors as well. You know, if you are working all hours and overstretched, what message does that send to your team? If you then go and offload some of that stuff onto people, are you expecting the same of them? Are you modeling a behavior which means that that it's almost implicit that you want them to work late hours and things if they see you doing it as well? Where does that responsibility and how does that fit into how you're delegating well, that kind of role model for the team as well? Do you think that's got a part to play in some of that?
I think so. I think for sure it does. I think if you're going to work late, you need to, in my view, I need to do it at home, or try to do it at home. Because one of the responsibilities is you need to look not stressed, and you need to look, and this is a little artificial because I'm a really transparent person, and when I'm stressed, I really find it hard not to show it. But you kind of have to hold that back and let your team see you got it together. And this is pretty easy. You might be working like a dog at home behind the scenes, but you have to be seen to be the job. It's coming not that hard to you, and it's not that bad, and everything's fine, and everything's great, and everything's good. Even when you're in trouble, you have to show that kind of face, which is hard, but I think you need to do it. It's kind of like, I think at Netflix they had unlimited holidays, right? And everyone has the same story around unlimited holidays. Like it doesn't work. It's worse because no one ever takes it because of the peer pressure internally. And at Netflix, they actually found until the CEO started taking more holidays, telling people, posting it on the website, on their internal wiki and stuff about his holidays, making sure he took 2 months off a year, that it didn't work. Past that point, then it started to work. At that point, it started to work. It started to show, because it wasn't just about putting a policy up. It was about modeling the behavior. You had to model that it was okay to take time off. And you had to model that you needed to de-stress, and people were in charge of that themselves. You had to model that everyone gets stressed, including the CEO. And they did that by taking holidays. Didn't necessarily show it and yell and shout at people or whatever, but they did that by like, oh, I'm getting this buildup. I need to take some time off. I'm going to take a couple months. So he takes a lot of holidays and he models it and he shows people, and then the rest of the company follows. And I think that there's something to be said for that.
So around that transparency, I'm totally aligned with that. So with my team, I do a similar thing where I'll tell them, hey, I'm having a break, or if I'm working late, I might go to the gym at 5 because that's actually what suits my working pattern a little bit better. And having that flexibility, and again, coaching and educating them that what suits them at that particular point in time, it might not suit my lifestyle or how I'm working. So yes, I might be on at 8, 9, 10 o'clock, but maybe I had 2 hours between 4 and 6 to go to the gym and have something to eat. So just being really open and showing them that you're doing that too. And the other point I would raise is checking in on them, or if you're noticing some of these behaviors, raising that in your one-to-ones, checking in, that and kind of reiterating that's not expected. Are you striking the right balance here? Is this an indicator of a problem with too much workload? How do we fix that? And just keep those, it's just communication, really.
Yeah, it is leading by example, by behaving by example, sort of thing. An interesting piece of feedback that I had that I got a couple of years ago from one of the senior people in my team was that I was protecting the team too much from difficult news. For example, some business results that weren't good or hard technical challenges. That was an interesting call out on something behavioral as well, where I was trying to overprotect the team in a way that was actually counterproductive. And so what I learned out of that is I also to Chris's point, you can let your team know as well when you're having a hard time. That's okay. Like if you're really nervous because of something external or something else, let them know. And then the interesting behavior that I found from my own team is that they started finding solutions for me. I wasn't very clear because I was working through ambiguity and complexity. I wasn't clear how to delegate the problem, but starting this open conversation, my team started fixing and taking on parts of the problem for me. So which is a form of delegating as well, I guess. So that's a mistake I'm trying to avoid as well. Like I'll share with my team, things aren't so good here. This is very complex. I haven't gotten my head around this thing yet, but just so you know, it's on my plate. Super helpful.
It's clearly a balance to strike, isn't it, between what Chris was saying around, yeah, everything's fine, we're good, we can cope, but actually the situation is also this. Yeah,
a balance, definitely.
Yeah, we actually only have about 5 minutes left. There is one more question that's popped up in from the audience. So maybe we could do a quick round as we start to wrap things up. Asks any advice around building that initial trust with people who are maybe not very experienced at having stuff delegated to them. So, practical tips on building that trust and setting things up from the start with people you have maybe new to working with or have not had much experience at having stuff delegated to them. Thoughts?
That's actually a really, really good question. Something that's hard to do. I don't know if the other panelists have different techniques, but I tend to show a lot of vulnerability. And to do that, I usually tell them about the 10 ways I've screwed it up or seen it been screwed up in the past. And be like, I've done this before. These are the mistakes I made. I don't know if you'll suffer with them, but this is the advice I got, and these are the managers. And then you're kind of open up. You're like, whoa. So he's not expecting me to be perfect. He's saying he screwed up a whole bunch of times and he didn't do it perfectly the first time. He's not having this persona of, I don't know if arrogance is the right word, but do you know what I mean? And once you're vulnerable in front of people, then the trust, I find, builds a lot faster. Some people think it's fake. Some people think you're doing a playbook, but most people open up shortly after that. And I found it shortens the amount of time it takes to build trust from something around 6 months to closer to 3, maybe a month and a half, even if you've got really open people. And that's my technique. There's some other ones I use, but that's the main one.
Yeah, so some practical one. This reminds me of a talk I once attended by Kevin Goldsmith, who was talking about how to do your first one-to-one, which when I think about delegating, which I applied, I transformed it to apply on delegating. The technique here goes as follows. Like you can do an exercise with the person you're delegating to first of all collect all the tasks that you're doing together, that you're delegating basically. And give yourself 10 minutes or so to document all those tasks, one proposed it. Then work through those post-its one by one and figure out which ones I'm accountable for, and you're just working with the other person for. A second category of tasks is which ones are you executing on, but I need to make the decisions. And the next category of task is you running the whole thing, but you're informing me. So you're making the decisions and everything. You're just informing me. And then the fourth type of task you delegate is you're completely owning this task and you don't even need to inform me. Just run with it. So I applied this. I literally created a board in Trello with 4 columns, categorized every task in one of the 4, And the interesting thing about that was we could obviously iterate over that, check in on it week over week, but also tasks would move on the boards from left to right. So things that I would make the decisions on after a couple of months working together, I was no longer required to make the decisions because you were automatically aligned. And so that task moved to you just inform me, and some of the informed tasks moved to, I don't even need to know, just run with it, completely 100% delegated. So this is a very interesting framework, especially if you start working with someone new or just hired someone or something like that.
I don't know if this is from the delegatee's point of view, as in they want to build trust upwards, or it's downwards from the delegator to the delegatee. I'm not sure which angle to approach that. If it's from the top down, I agree with Chris and Iwan. It's about being open, transparent, vulnerable, saying I don't know, and being really clear about that I don't know how to do this. How do you think we should do it? And getting them involved in that side of things. Being empathetic and recognizing when they might be feeling vulnerable themselves, when there might be an issue, and trying to front foot that. I always find that's a bit easier, saying maybe you're feeling like this, or without imposing feelings, but it's kind of really trying to be almost over empathetic to build those relationships early on. Finding a common ground, I think, is really important. Trying to have lots of conversations, not necessarily just about work, outside work, if people are comfortable with that, and finding that connection, because that's really what you're trying to find, to build trust and bonds and relationships, humans when they connect together, and finding that side of things. If you're trying to build trust from the delegatee to the delegator, I would definitely have several conversations with your delegate and kind of map out, if it's your first time, here's the plan, what do you think, here's how I'm going to approach things. Start with small tasks, build that up, and then move on to bigger tasks. It does take time, but yeah, it's relationship building.
Okay. We are at past. There are still, there's another question just gone into the chat, but I'm not going to be able to get to it because we are running out of time. I am just posting into the chat now contact details for Chris, Iwan, and Sara, and myself. You'll also find them on the Slack groups anyway in CTO Craft. There's also details in there of the next CTO Craft Byte event, which is Thursday the 10th of June, where everyone's going to be talking about hiring engineers through non-linear pathways such as apprenticeships. So maybe some of you could join us on that one as well. Just as we close up then, is there any final thoughts from anybody? Iwan, I noticed you posted a link in the chat as well to that talk, which is cool. Any other thoughts, anybody, just as we close up the room?
No, I just want to thank everyone because I learned a lot in this conversation. I actually made a lot of notes, so thanks very much. Thank you for facilitating.
Awesome. It is recorded as well, so anybody that wasn't making notes, feel free to go back and have another look, so that'll be fine. Chris, Sara, anything you want to add?
No.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Really enjoyed it.
Thanks very much, everybody. Catch you on Slack. Bye-bye.